Hi, I'm Ed Evans speaking for Climate Deception Network. Today's carbon dioxide density in Earth's atmosphere is about 417 parts per million. I will share an important interview from the Ian Masters Show on Sunday, October 27, 2020. But first, recall how in 2016 election, many of us from the environmental movements warned that a Trump presidency would result in packing the Supreme Court with right-wing climate deniers and much more. Remember how certain left-wing intellectuals, admonished us for our short-sightedness, our failure to see that the Democratic Party, led by Hillary Clinton, was not that much different than the Republican Party. A two-headed party it was. We were reminded that neither of these corporate parties were friends of the earth. Many of us agreed since we came to the same conclusion decades ago. We also pointed out that we, like the seventh generation, are far, far out of time. We believe that a Trump presidency threatened the future prospect of future generations, human and non-human. Now, because of the Trump-packed Supreme Court with climate deniers, greenhouse gases continue to rise and will continue to do so more rapidly. We are lost. We are now beyond a safe landing for the seventh generation, for all generations following us. Well, here's an Ian Masters interview with Nancy MacLean, professor of history and public policy at Duke University and author of Democracy in Chains, The Deep History of the Radical Right Stealth Plan for America. Good luck to you.
And joining us now, Nancy MacLean, the award-winning author of Behind the Mask of Chivalry and Freedom is Not Enough. She is the William H. Chafe Professor of History and Public Policy at Duke University, and her latest book is Democracy in Chains, The Deep History of the Radical Right Stealth Plan for America. Welcome to Background Briefing, Nancy MacLean.
It's great to be back with you, Ian.
Well, thanks, Nancy. And it looks as though the Radical Right's Stealth Plan for America's crowning glory took place yesterday in the United States Senate, where shortly after confirming Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court, Justice Clarence Thomas swore her in. So they're working at warp speed, and in spite of the fact that much of the focus during the confirmation hearing was on women's reproductive rights and the Affordable Care Act, she is a gift to the oligarchy, is she not? And that's what Sheldon Whitehouse tried to point out. So do you think that message got through?
I'm afraid that it did not get through as much as it should have. I thought Sheldon Whitehouse's presentation was magnificent. He didn't even bother to talk about her record, but instead explained to America how she had been brought forward as a nominee, and that is basically through these networks created by funding from dark money, billionaire, right-wing oligarchs, far to the right, actually, of even the Republican Party, in terms of the kinds of positions the Roberts Court has taken on things. But this network of dark money institutions that, things like the Judicial Crisis Network, the Federalist Society, the Citizens United, all of these groups are funded by dark money donors, and they want Amy Coney Barrett in a way that the way I think of them is sadly that while the people are certainly committed to the anti-feminist and homophobic agenda that Barrett has gotten a lot of publicity for. In fact, for the donors, that is just useful to get her a popular following among conservative, theologically conservative Republican voters, because her real gift to the billionaire oligarchs will be that she is likely going to be the decisive vote to roll back the entire model of the 20th century liberal state. Journalists and senators and direct mailing wizards tend to focus on issues that people are already familiar with, like Roe versus Wade, like marriage equality, that they think will really motivate people to do something. But the problem is they don't explain to us that she is taking aim, and she's there for the billionaire oligarchs to take aim at the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution, which is the keystone of the arch of all federal policy that people value, including Social Security, including Medicare, including labor rights, including anti-discrimination, environmental protection. We could go on, but that is what they have been patiently building towards over decades, and now it is within reach because of this essentially stolen seat.
So let's sort of focus on that key issue, the idea that the entire architecture of much of what we take for granted here could be whipped out from under us because of a kind of obscure interpretation of the Commerce Act. What argument do the conservatives have in terms of undoing it?
They argue that they represent the Constitution, as they always say, as originally conceived. They neglect the fact that the Constitution, as originally conceived, was aimed in some 5 ways to protect slavery, chattel slavery, as the most profitable form of capitalism of its day. But so they would say that they're going back to a limited constitution that prevailed before the Progressive Era and the New Deal. And that's true as far as it goes in some ways. But first, the framers of the Constitution did seek to create a document that could be modified by ensuing generations to keep up with a changing world. And one aspect of the changing world is the vast development of capitalism, of American military power, of incredible congregations of private corporate wealth that endangered democracy. And that is why, beginning in the Progressive Era with judges like Louis Brandeis and going into the New Deal era, scholars, legal scholars, and ordinary citizens and workers realized that the Constitution, as then interpreted, was making workers' lives unlivable, was polluting our planet, was leaving older people in extreme poverty, was holding up the disenfranchisement of African Americans in the South. I mean, we could go on, but that model of the Constitution called the Lochner, model of interpretation called the Lochner Court, is exactly what these Koch-funded legal scholars and organizations like the Federalist Society, the Institute for Justice, Judicial Crisis Network, what they are aiming to return to. And they're actually quite open about this if you know to look for it. Leonard Leo, who's longtime head of the Federalist Society, that Trump basically outsourced the job of choosing judicial nominees to, has said that they are within striking range of getting rid of the entire constitutional framework of the 20th century liberal democracy. So this is really serious stuff. Because if you lose the courts, potentially you lose the whole game. I don't think it's going to go that way because I don't think that these guys, and they're overwhelmingly, wealthy white men, I don't think they understand how much American society and culture has changed and that people are not going to accept the situation that they're imposing on us. So I think we could see serious upheaval and ultimately a push to amend the Constitution from the left to deal with things like Citizens United, like these essentially stolen judicial seats. But it's really hard to convey, I believe, to listening audiences and to the American people how very serious this moment we're in is. And we don't have even the language for it, but it's kind of like a quiet coup when you put all of this stuff together. No tanks, no generals, none of that. But look what they're doing. I mean, taking this seat, defying their own, what they said when President Obama, had 10 months to choose a nominee. Now they had 30 days. They rammed through this candidate without any process, with the Republican senators saying they'd vote for her before they even heard from her. That's happening while the Trump administration, thanks to the brinkmanship Senator McConnell played, while the Trump administration has been appointing more members of the federal judiciary than any president in recent history, while they are working overtime to suppress the vote in state after state with things like Harris County, a state that's as big as Rhode Island and has enough votes to sway an election. They put the governor, and I'm sure your listeners have heard of this, is limiting the whole huge county to one single drop box for absentee ballots in the middle of a pandemic. Right. McConnell wouldn't let the Senate even consider coronavirus relief when so many people are suffering from the expiration of previous provision while they're rushing through this judicial nominee. So again, I think if you look on all of these different fronts, which are being funded by the same network of arch right-wing donors associated with Charles Koch, you begin to see that this is a highly integrated, highly strategic, long-term plan coming to fruition. And everything hinges on the outcome of this election.
And again, I'm speaking with Nancy MacLean, the award-winning author of Behind the Mask of Chivalry and Freedom is Not Enough. She is the William H. Chafe Professor of History and Public Policy at Duke University, and her latest book is Democracy in Chains, The Deep History of the Radical Right Stealth Plan for America. So why is it then, with the exception of Sheldon Whitehouse, that throughout these judicial nomination hearings before the Senate Judiciary Committee, they've turned into a kind of meaningless farce? You can go back to obviously the one that Joe Biden presided over with Clarence Thomas was a catastrophe. But ever since then, all of these conservatives put on the bench by Leonard Leo and the Federalists. And he, of course, is a member of Opus Dei and is an extremely conservative right-wing Catholic who believes in a kind of combination of moral authoritarianism and laissez-faire capitalism. He does not represent diversity within America's religions in any degree, but yet he's got 6 now of his people on, and prior to that he got 2 on the court, Kennedy and Scalia. So he's had a very outsized role, not just in terms of the lack of diversity within America's religions, having 6 conservative Catholics on a 9-member court, but even within the Catholic faith itself. Opus Dei does not represent the diversity of the Catholic faith. So it's an extraordinary situation, but the fact that they focus on abortion and other hot-button issues and not on whether or not these candidates are corporatists. And the most outrageous example of all was Gorsuch, who auditioned for the Supreme Court with the so-called frozen truck driver, a case where he ruled against all the other justices. And it would have meant that if truck driver whose rig broke down in the dead of winter abandoned the rig, otherwise he would have frozen to death, and Gorsuch ruled that the man should have stayed with his rig and froze to death. And that, of course, won him over with the Leonard Leo and his dark money backers. So they all say the same stuff, we can't talk about it because we might rule on it. And then they turn around when they get on the court and they rule exactly the way that their critics feared they would.
That is absolutely true. I think one problem in this situation is that the Democrats on the Judiciary Committee were a little bit stuck in that they knew they didn't have the votes to defeat her nomination, so they were really pitching toward the election and to have an administration that has whose incompetence and inaction, and when it does act, it's stupid action like pushing COVID protection onto the states, and to have then a court nominee who will vote against the Affordable Care Act, and Trump is confident of that. I think that they were right to stress the impact on health care for many millions of Americans who would lose it from the combination of the Trump administration and this Federalist Society-dominated Supreme Court. But I wish there were more senators with a long-term vision and leadership and belief in the American people to educate them in the way that Sheldon Whitehouse did in his presentation. And if people haven't heard it, I really urge them to look it up on YouTube. It is utterly spellbinding, probably about 20 minutes, but he just lays out this entire Koch-funded, and others too, but Charles Koch is absolutely the leader, this whole operation, which has worked, again, over decades to transform our judiciary to the point where Sheldon Whitehouse points to what he calls the Roberts 90. These are 90 decisions made 5-4 by the court presided over by Chief Justice John Roberts, that every single one supported the interests of those dark money billionaire donors who put them on the bench. 90 decisions, 95-4 decisions. You know, when you look at something like that, it is so absolutely at odds with, you know, prior tradition in this country, with any notion of an independent judiciary, et cetera. But I think the one thing that these right-wing donors failed to consider adequately is that the Supreme Court and the judiciary more generally depend for their effectiveness on their legitimacy with the people. If they lose legitimacy with the people, which this court has already begun to do and will do so more with the seating of Amy Coney Barrett and the kinds of decisions she can be anticipated to make, if they lose the legitimacy of the court, then they get into trouble with the people in a big way. And then you have all kinds of social upheaval and turbulence that in the past has led to changes in the court. And you know, the Biden administration, I think rightly, has not gotten bogged down and been trapped into a discussion of expanding the court before the election, which the right really wanted to do because it went so badly for Roosevelt. But he has said that he would convene a group to study the court situation and the judiciary and to think about what to do, because most Americans who are paying attention to these things knows that our Constitution is already badly out of step with the needs of a diverse population in a situation of grotesque corporate power in the 21st century. So we are going to have to find different ways to amend the Constitution from the left, to think about the judiciary, to do all kinds of deep structural democracy and legal reforms if we are going to have a government that is responsive to the people.
Well, just in the last couple of minutes, of course, Amy Coney Barrett on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals already has tipped her hand as a corporatist in a 2018 case, Bruce Bessner and Barbara Bessner versus the Boeing Company. She voted to reverse the district court's decision to send a personal injury lawsuit back to the state's courts, which is exactly what Boeing wanted. And then on the docket, currently, starting on October the 5th, there are a whole bunch of cases involving big corporations. Ford Motor Company versus the Montana 8th Judicial District, which would limit what individuals can pursue in terms of personal injury suit. Rutledge versus Pharmaceutical Care Management would mean that states can regulate pharmacy benefit managers. And Carney versus Adams on whether states can require judges to be affiliated with one of the two major political parties. And there are other cases involving deceptive commercial activities, arbitration agreements that limit people's ability to sue corporations, and even the enforcement of IRS reporting requirements. So that's all on the docket. A lot of the focus during the hearings was on, again, the Affordable Care Act coming up very soon and other incredibly important voting rights cases. But again, the docket's already filled with all of these big corporate cases that Amy Coney Barrett will, along with the other conservatives, will do the bidding of their paymasters.
Yeah. Now, I totally agree with your characterization of the situation. I will say this, that Donald Trump has been the distractor in chief for 4 years. He has behaved so outrageously and so commanded and domineered the news cycle that I think many Americans have been almost unable to focus on anything else. So let us hope that, as it looks possible from the early voting, et cetera, that Donald Trump ceases to be president of the United States in January. At that moment, this whole apparatus that we're talking about will go into play against the Biden administration. They're already going into play to stop a Biden administration. So I think that there will come a point where people will recognize, as one wonderful public health nurse who read my book said, she said, I realize now that President Trump is the tumor, not the cancer. And it's important to get the diagnosis right, to get the best treatment plan right. So, obviously he has wrought mayhem and debase this country beyond recognition. And the immediate mobilization, I think, is for getting people out to vote and making this a very decisive election. But then the day after Election Day, we have got to begin to think about how to address and how to stop this huge train coming down the track of corporate supremacy that is working through so many different front groups, the Heritage Society, the Cato Institute, the Independent Institute, the Federalist Society, the Americans for Prosperity, the state members of the State Policy Network, the international members of the Atlas Network. This thing is huge and well-funded, but it all proceeds with a simple understanding that they know the majority of the people do not want to live in the kind of world they are trying to create. And if the people understand what is the world they're trying to create and how that framework would devastate ordinary people of every description, I really believe that people will go the next step, which is serious structural democracy reform, which is organizing unions and other aspects of popular power in order to reclaim government and renew it and reform it for the 21st century, and frankly, to save the planet, because this Koch network and the over 600 corporate donors who are part of it is heavily based in the fossil fuel sector, and a lot of this is being driven by their fierce commitment to stop action on climate change and the threat to our planet.
Well, Nancy MacLean, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
It's always a pleasure to talk with you, Ian. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And again, I've been speaking with Nancy MacLean, who's an award-winning author of Behind the Mask of Chivalry and Freedom is Not Enough. She's the William H. Chafe Professor of History and Public Policy at Duke University. And her latest book is Democracy in Chains, The Deep History of the Radical Right's Stealth